Hello. Welcome to the launch of Mapping Civic Measurement, a new comprehensive landscape review and a first-of-its-kind framework for mapping civic readiness and opportunities. We are so thrilled to share this with you today. Good afternoon. I'm Raj Vinakota, President at the Institute for Citizens and Scholars. For more than 75 years, Citizens and Scholars has worked with practitioners, scholars, and leaders across the country to cultivate today's young people as informed and productive citizens. Today's launch marks a continuation of our work to support the civic field, including all of you, to be more effective in strengthening democracy. Our agenda today is simple. First, our researchers will walk you through the findings. Then, we'll be joined by an exciting panel of diverse leaders. And finally, we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion with you. As you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A box. You all received an email this morning with links to the report. We'll be sure to follow up after this webinar with the slides and the recording as well. Throughout our hour together, we'll also hear from a variety of voices from across the civic field, including leaders you might recognize, and also young people who demonstrate the promise and power of the next generation and why we're all here. Let's get started.
Young people are the bedrock of our nation. When we amplify their voices, we are demonstrating a commitment to justice, truth, and transparency. Through challenging times, we often find ourselves wondering how to transcend ignorance and apathy. And in so many ways, that rests in how we bridge our schools to our society. What excites me more than anything is that in so many spaces, this work is already being done. Young folks across the country are leaning on intergenerational collaboration, building coalitions, and resisting a world that fails to protect our democratic values. And that is why civics matters.
It is crucial that Gen Z gets civically engaged because ultimately we will be the ones inheriting this country. The way to do this is by simply having a conversation, whether it be with a family member or a friend, at a party or at a park. Dialogue is the lifeblood of our democracy. We cannot sit back and watch on the sidelines. Engaging in the space of politics is the most important part of the process. From writing a letter to your congressman, to attending a town hall, to voting, every little step matters. And eventually, hundreds of little steps will create real change.
A democratic society has to equip itself with civic strength by offering its rising generation an education that inspires their commitment to constitutional democracy. We must equip them with the knowledge and skills needed to sustain self-government among free and equal citizens. We haven't been paying for civic education for some time, and it shows. We've got to invest anew in civic education and engagement. For this, measurement is critical. It guides understanding of what works and what doesn't. This report is a significant contribution to our field. It builds on the incredible work done by practitioners and scholars across the country. I still believe constitutional democracy offers the world's best hope for human flourishing. That's why I do this work.
Thanks to those voices, and there's more to come throughout this hour. Next, I'm excited to introduce our two principal investigators to walk through the findings of this report. Debbie Gotti is president of Steadfast, as well as an executive fellow with the Institute for Citizens and Scholars and an executive fellow with the State Policy Network. Matt Leininger directs the Democracy Innovation Project at the National Conference on Citizenship and is the author, with Tina Nabachi, of Public Participation for 21st Century Democracy. Matt and Debbie will take the next 10 minutes or so to walk you through the findings. Please ask your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll answer as many of them later as we can in this webinar. Debbie and Matt, over to you.
Thank you, Raj. And thank you for suggesting this partnership. It's been terrific. I think we also want to thank all of our friends and colleagues at other organizations who share this interest in civic measurement. You've been incredibly helpful to us And I want to thank the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which has supported some of this work on my part and allowed me to explore some of these questions of civic measurement. So what we did in this project was to try to, first of all, gather as many measurement tools as we possibly could. We ended up with over 200 of them. And when I say tools, I don't mean the reports and articles and books. What I mean is the tools in which those things are based, the surveys, the rubrics, the assessments that various kinds of people are using to measure different aspects of civic life. The person who actually led the charge is our colleague at Citizen Scholars, Anna Gallos, who was our intrepid, friendly, tireless, and brilliant tool gatherer and categorizer. So thank you, Anna, for all of your hard work on this. We also talked to a lot of people. We had about 70 interviews, I think it was, and that helped us, directed us to some of the tools we found. It also helped us figure out what we're looking at, and how we're categorizing these ways in which people are trying to measure civic life. So we eventually realized through this, we're looking at two big categories. One focused on individuals, and that's what you're looking at now, individual civic readiness. And then another we'll show you in a second, which is civic opportunities. So we divided these different aspects of civic readiness into kind of 4 quadrants. People are trying to measure what citizens understand, what they believe, how they participate, and how they connect. Connect actually wasn't part of our original formulation. It's something we added along the way based on input from practitioners and conversations and workshops, people basically making the point that the ways in which citizens connect and their skills for doing so have a big impact on how they can actually be effective citizens. So then within each of these wheels, as you work out from the middle, you get to more and more specific areas. And we're trying to enumerate all the different ways, the elements of each thing that people are trying to measure. So then if you go to the next slide here, we look at the civic opportunities. These are the ways that our institutions, our organizations, our communities in general are offering chances for people to use their skills, learn them, refine them, and kind of gain new civic capacities. Now, again, this is not our meaning research teams. It's not our kind of framework of what civic opportunities should be offered or what civic aspects of civic readiness people should have. We're just working upward from what people are measuring to kind of assemble this larger picture of citizenship and of civic opportunities. So, and again, this wheel has those same 4 quadrants at the middle: that understand, believe, participate, and connect. And then as you go on farther to the rim of the wheel, you see more specific things. And this is where the differences are between these 2 wheels. The specific things that are being offered to people to help them learn, refine, hone, use those skills. And then we grouped the kind of civic opportunities with the element on the civic readiness wheel that seems that they're most trying to measure. If you look at both maps together in this next slide, and basically what we're trying to show here is what should be and could be kind of a symbiotic relationship that the measurers are trying to establish and to kind of to understand, to examine. The symbiotic relationship being that, the more you give people opportunities to learn skills, use them, refine them, the more they do those things, and that benefits their communities and society, and in turn opens up new opportunities for more people to learn these skills, refine them, and so on. So again, so basically you've got the attempt to kind of show the relationship between the 2 wheels overall. The other thing to kind of see about these wheels is that they spin. That basically you've got civic opportunities that can affect more than one aspect of civic readiness. So just for an example, you might have an understanding of America's founding ideas based on a class you took in high school, civics class or history class. You might also get it from social media. And so your skills, social media literacy might be impacting your understanding or knowledge of America's founding ideas. Or what you know about government, how government works. That could be something you gain through a citizens academy that the local government runs. It also could be something you gain by directly participating in a public process to make a decision in a deliberative way, or to decide how to allocate a public budget. So these wheels can spin, and we can use them to kind of show the relationships between different things, different aspects of public life. So let me give you a couple of findings here and that kind of occurred to us as we looked at these wheels and these tools, and Debbie's going to give you a couple more. So first of all, and this version you're looking at here has all these dots on it. So basically what we did is we took every single one of these 200 plus tools and we pinned it to the part of the map that it most is trying to measure. And when you see that, and by the way, there's a chart at the end of the report where you can kind of alphabetically go through each tool. You can see how we categorized it, where we pinned it. We are certainly open to people's corrections, edits, additions there. This is just a snapshot here. This is a work in progress. So we would love to have more of your knowledge about tools we didn't know about, or how we maybe miscategorize something or whatever. We'd like to keep building this knowledge for the whole field. But basically, if you look at this and you kind of see the kind of the two wheels and the pins on them, you recognize the fact that people are measuring civic readiness much more than they are civic opportunities. And I think this seems to kind of reflect a broader reality in the field, is that we have focused so much on individuals, and particularly young individuals, high school students and college students. That's very important. But we have focused less on the opportunities that those individuals, young people or older people, might have when they're out in their communities, the opportunities that they might want or might need to exercise those skills. So that's an important piece that kind of jumped out of this. The other key finding that I want to talk about is that if you go to the next slide here, it became clear to us that, that there are disconnects. And we found this from the interviews, not just from looking at the tools and pinning them, but people are kind of people who are measuring one thing or one set of things are disconnected from people trying to measure something else. And it occurs to us that there are many situations where people could really gain a lot from one another by combining their tools, that by kind of comparing them, by working some of the same contexts, and that would be a very important thing for the field. And that also that there are certainly areas where not much is being measured at all. And people, we heard this from the interviews, people talked about different aspects of citizenship or civic opportunities that they know are important or they feel might be very important, but no one has actually been able to figure out or start to measure them. And so that, just like some of our colleagues in civic education, civic learning, just as they talk about civic deserts where people lack these opportunities, it's also true that we have civic measurement deserts where we have a lack of knowledge, we have a lack of tools for understanding the potential impacts of the things that people are doing to strengthen civic life. From there, I will hand it over to you, Debbie.
Thank you, Matt. And Matt has been a wonderful partner to work on this project with, along with Anna. So let's talk about the third key finding that we had. Voting dominates civic learning measurement. Now, a review of the tools reveals that researchers and practitioners have concentrated on voter participation. They looked to voting for political or methodological reasons, and it was not a surprise to many people we spoke to that this was the case. Voting is relatively easy to measure and to quantify, and it's relatively easy to validate at scale. But even though it's not a surprise to most people, it does perhaps come with some unintended implications and consequences. First, a focus on measuring voting may oversimplify, confuse, dilute all the other important elements that go into measuring civic readiness. And ironically, this focus on voting may make it more difficult to effectively assess voting itself. Why? Well, studies indicate that willingness to vote is dependent on other factors, such as connections with trusted people like family members or friends. It's contingent on the networks that we have. So what are the influences of those connections and those networks? If we can impact those in a positive way, what implications are there for voter education and other civic opportunities? So this finding perhaps raises some interesting questions for how resources for measuring civic readiness might be allocated in the future. So let's turn to our final finding number 4. Now, this one here, there are varying definitions for what good citizenship means, all of which need examining because our world is changing. As we engaged with people, it became apparent that different groups have varying definitions of what they even mean by citizenship. Now, this fact obviously impacts which aspects of the maps people are trying to measure and why they're focused on them. Whether one is taking an Aristotelian view or a global view of citizenship, we live in an era of massive technological, social, and political change. So regardless of what kind of definition one holds of citizenship, where we heard agreement were around these things. First, that traditional measures of citizenship may be out of step with current civic realities. For example, skills and knowledge gained outside of school are relevant for how citizens engage. The second, technology is changing quickly and creating shifts. Researchers are just beginning to understand the impact of technology on citizenship, and there's a need for the research to keep pace. A lot of people spoke to us about that. And then third, there is dissatisfaction with the current state. At the same time, there's no real consensus on what role citizens can or should play in changing this. And so these facts make it difficult to identify commonly understood targets for measurement, let alone how to measure them. So in the report itself, you will see that we lay out some decisions that need to be made as a result of these types of conditions. So those are our 4 findings, and there's more information in the report around them. Now, a little bit about what we're considering next. As we consider that, there are some additional challenges that we've noted that are important for us to keep in mind as we go forward with the civic learning field as a whole. The first is that we are working in a hyper-polarized environment. I think we all have recognized that. There's also a sense that the field has become somewhat dominated by certain ideological viewpoints and agendas. The third is that the efforts feel scattered across different disciplines, sometimes with even conflicting frameworks. People feel dissatisfied with the current state of public life and institutions, again, without the consensus about the shared goals for the future. And finally, there are concerns in every direction about power imbalances between authorities and citizens, and about how to protect the individual rights of all while thriving together in communities. So we believe this landscape report provides a unifying framework that speaks across these challenges. So here's our call to action. Basically, bottom line, different measurement approaches need to be coordinated to understand our overall progress. Moving forward, we need to do more than refine methodologies or marshal resources as a field. We need to bring together truly diverse practitioners, researchers, and funders to engage with each other, share best practices, and in an entrepreneurial way, work on some shared goals. What might some of those shared goals be? Well, the first, let's define citizenship and civic readiness sufficiently to be able to speak across sectors, disciplines, and models. Second, let's take the next step in answering the big civic measurement question. How do we know if we're making progress? Do we have the right tools? What's missing? What needs to be prioritized? Are the tools providing the answers we need? Next, let's fill in the gaps where measurement is lacking. As we can see on the maps, there are a number of areas that are open for research and development. Let's also create more interaction between the two wheels, between individual civic readiness and civic infrastructure. Let's build the relationships and bridges that are needed for us to understand how the two work together. And then finally, let's study the actual relationship between equity, opportunity, and civic infrastructure. Many of us have thoughts and hypotheses here, and these are worth exploring. So we at Citizens and Scholars are excited to work with all of you on the next phase of this work. Here's a little glimpse of what's on the horizon. In addition to convening cross-disciplinary specialized working groups, we'll be launching a resource hub where everyone can access measurement tools. We'll be participating in events and other knowledge sharing convenings to continue building and sharing eventually a final civic learning framework that includes measures and sub-measures of what engaged citizenship involves. And we will also be doing more. So stay tuned for that. And now we're going to hear from some more voices about how this report can be brought to life across the field.
America is an experiment, but it's not an experiment conducted in a laboratory. Our experiment is whether we, the people, can govern ourselves under law. Civics in this setting is not reducible to voting or volunteering, studying, or skills building. Civic readiness is about the entire lifelong journey of being an American. This is citizenship of a high calling, and this report from the Institute for Citizens and Scholars reminds us that civic readiness can be defined in a humane and holistic way, and also measured. It helps us see the difficulties in measuring readiness and points the way to overcoming some of these challenges. It's an important call to cooperative and interdisciplinary action, and I'm excited to see where it leads.
I firmly believe that we cannot have a constitutional democracy that functions without civic learning. I can imagine a thriving constitutional democracy in which we solve our common problems. But I cannot imagine it without young people being prepared with the civic knowledge, the civic skills, and the civic disposition to make it happen. And we also have to engage them in that process.
Every year that my senior class runs a voter registration drive, they ask, How many registrations did last year's class get? They want that goal to beat last year's number. It's just one measurement, but it helps us improve. Pearson's Law, measure to improve. For civic education, let's always improve.
I'm so thrilled that we've been able to share this with you and that we will be able to have you have access to all these tools that we've captured over the last 9 months of work. Speaking of thrilled, I'm thrilled to welcome Stephanie Sanford now to the virtual stage. Stephanie leads global policy and external relations for the College Board. She's also president for the College Board Foundation, which advances educational access and opportunity for all students. I'm also grateful that Stephanie serves on the Board of Trustees at Citizens and Scholars. Now, Stephanie, before we welcome the panelists to the stage, I'd like to hear why College Board and the College Board Foundation is investing in civic measurement and how you hope that this report advances the civic field. Oh. Stephanie, I think you're still muted, unfortunately. There we go.
Okay, can we try? Can you hear
It
me?
works now.
Okay, beautiful. No, thanks, Raj. I'm super excited to be involved with this effort. As we think about it, common, well understood measures are a powerful way to make collaboration more effective and impactful. If you think about especially those measures that already exist and are publicly available, so that each organization doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. I mean, I guess in some ways we're inventing the wheel for them.
That's right.
Right? Common measures, they also can help unify and strengthen a field because they can enable multiple and varied organizations to work towards a common set of goals, measure them over time, and ultimately tell a compelling story of progress. In my experience, that dynamic can help expand engagement, bring more people and more organizations to common work, and build and sustain momentum. And so from where we sit, that's what we really hope that this report can help catalyze.
Fantastic, and thank you. I'm excited to hear what our panelists have to say. So over to you to introduce our guests.
Thanks, Raj. I'm super excited to welcome 3 great leaders who are bringing great imagination and energy to citizen development efforts. Their work across multiple fields proves the maxim: what gets measured is what gets done. They all have stellar records of real measurable results in the education field. And I'm excited to hear from them how to bring their focus on results to this citizen development space. So we're joined first by Hannah Scandera. She is CEO of the Daniels Fund based in Denver. Their mission is to transform communities through citizen development and upward mobility. Hannah's had a successful career in education spanning federal policy and across 3 states. She's founded multiple leadership programs and educational initiatives and is a recognized expert on growth, change management, and organizational culture. Second is Katie Jenner. Dr. Jenner became Indiana's first Secretary of Education in 2021. She's been a high school teacher. She's held school and leadership roles at the district and school level, and served as vice president of Ivy Tech Community College. Most recently, Katie led the release of Indiana Graduates Prepare to Succeed, a new digital dashboard that displays student school performance across a number of outcomes. In addition to a bunch of serving on a number of boards and commissions, she's also a Citizens and Scholars Fellow. And finally, my good friend, Kent McGuire. He's the Education Program Director at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. He leads investments to help all students succeed in college, work, and civic life. Prior to his time at Hewlett, he was the Dean of the College of Education at Temple University, and then an Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Education. Thrilled to be able to serve with Kent on the Board of Directors at the Institute for Citizens and Scholars. So welcome all of you. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for the work that you've done in education broadly, and also your work on this critical topic. I'm going to start with each of you, a single question about your current work in citizen development, and then we'll do a second round, kind of a lightning round, asking you for concrete advice to others who are currently in this work with us and to those that we would like to have join us. So Katie, let's start with you and start with schools. Beginning this year, Indiana middle school students will be required to take one semester of civics before starting high school. And in addition to covering the civic knowledge foundations and functions of government, the things we think of as sort of typical civic stuff, the standards also extended to the role of citizens, including things like effectively voicing opinions, a commitment to the common good, and responsible use of the internet. Complicated, very contemporary. Can you tell us what drove the debate to include civic knowledge, skills, and virtues in the curriculum?
So thank you, Stephanie, for the question. Number one, it started with some civics champions right here in Indiana, and some of those are members of our legislature, our executive branch, but a lot were from outside. The Indiana Bar Foundation really leaned in. A past governor, Mitch Daniels, was president at Purdue University, and he leaned in at the higher ed level, which really spurred a lot of conversation about what we should be doing at the K-12 level. That caused a law to be passed or a couple of laws to be passed in 2021. Number one, we launched a civics education commission and a civics standards committee, specifically for the very quick turnaround in developing these Indiana civics standards. We already had civic standards spiraling through our curriculum, but now have an intentional course in the 6th grade. The other thing that we had happen in the legislative session in 2021 was the requirement by the legislature to build out a longitudinal dashboard that included a variety of indicators that matter. So we went straight to our Indiana constituents and asked them, what matters to you for all Indiana students? One of the characteristics that came up was civics literacy. So we knew that in order, if that's our profile of a graduate, if that's our key characteristic, we have to find a way to measure it. The third piece that I'll mention is we also have graduation pathways in addition to required coursework. And in addition to post-secondary readiness, a third element is all students in Indiana, in order to graduate, are required to have work-based learning, project-based learning, or service-based learning in order to graduate from an Indiana high school.
So how you know you'd be successful? Is all of this going to now be reflected in your dashboard?
Yes, ma'am. Our dashboard is launched. I remind the General Assembly, we're a year and a half ahead of schedule. It was due by July of 2024. We launched December 13th of 2022 and put those characteristics out there. We started very honestly with the state of Indiana. Let's pull what we know. So we pulled data from all of our different state agencies into one spot. And then the second is we're leaning in to build out any indicators or measurements to further show. Civics is one of those, and I'll be glad to share more as we continue the discussion.
That's terrific. That's super exciting, Katie, and ahead of schedule. Said no one ever, it seems like. So congratulations, really impressive.
Thank you.
So Kent, let's move from sort of schools and dashboards specifically to students. We heard from super compelling young people earlier in the webinar, and you've spoken quite eloquently about the power of student voice and agency. How can adult practitioners that are watching today ensure that young people have more skin in the game, right? That they're helping to create interesting and effective educational experiences that help develop, as Debbie said, sort of a real contemporary notion and effective as a citizen?
Well, let me just first say it's fun to see Katie Jenner there. 200 years ago, I worked at the Lilly Endowment, and I was right there in Indianapolis.
They're a great partner to us still. Thank you.
That's good to know. Obviously, Stephanie, you could start with the low-hanging fruit, like listening to students. It is like a really obvious thing you could do. I think there are structures that provide opportunities for that, maybe more continuously than often exist. These include things like advisory groups and task forces and other things that can be invented to get the student voice in the mix. Parenthetically, those structures and processes, I think, build a lot of muscle, for participation and engagement. So you sort of get a twofer there. We could do a better job of surveying kids. It's another form of listening to them on specific issues and topics. Now, it would really be good if we actually used the survey data that we got back, to think about how to change the kinds of opportunities that experiences that we create for them. And I do think that, to your point about skin in the game, we could go even further, which would be to give young people important stuff to do, interesting things to work on, things where the stakes are actually high. And I think that, if there were meaningful things for kids to weigh in on, decide about, the kind of engagement and motivation that would flow from that, much less turning, civics or democratic behavior, from a noun to a verb, I think we'd get a lot of that, so I think we've got lots of ways we could get better at this.
So I really like that, such sort of vivid terminology, like working on important things, that building a civic muscle in students. So Hannah, I want to turn to from students now to dashboards, now to this broader community, right? You've said that the solution to the civic crisis can't come solely through schools, but that we also have to engage people and institutions outside of education to help really tackle the crisis together. Can you tell us a bit about the Civics Bee? I've heard you talk about it before in a super compelling way, and you're piloting it with chambers of commerce from across the country. So tell us how you think this model could help move the needle, or maybe even to Kent's notion of, right, important things to do that can help build student civic muscle. Tell us about that.
Thanks, Stephanie. And I will just say, by the very nature of the word civic, I feel like it implies it's going to take more than a single lane, if you will, whether it's education, public institutions, private institutions, and civic institutions within our communities. So we are excited at the Daniels Fund. We launched a big bet in partnership with the U.S. Chamber Foundation to launch a Civics Bee. And, if you're sitting in your chair going, that's kind of cute. I agree, it is. And I'd also say it has a little bit more than just the cute factor on top of thinking like, oh, when I was a kid, I did the spelling bee. I think what's compelling about it is it does provide for this opportunity of the entire community to take some ownership. You have your business community, you have schools sending their kids to participate, you have families preparing their kids. So there's this, we've got boys and girls clubs sending their kids, et cetera. And it's for middle schoolers. So it's young. We're reaching kids at a young age, which I think is really a great time for that foundational understanding of what are the basics when it comes to our country, our history, and how do we get involved? Like literally, what are the how-tos, if you will? How does it all work? And we piloted last year in 5 cities. We're in 50 cities this year. And our goal is that by 2030, we've reached 1 million kids, and we are on ESPN with a live Civics Bee across this country in every single state in the nation. And we have just had incredible response. The beauty of it is there's a grass tops component because the U.S. Chamber provides what I'll call a bee in the box, so that there's, consistency, et cetera. But this grassroots opportunity for a chamber, a local chamber, this year's Denver, I live in Denver, and the Denver Chamber is hosting a Civics Bee and inviting the community. Last year, Albuquerque, New Mexico, they had their Secretary for Education as one of the judges. In Kentucky, they had the Secretary of State as a judge. And this brings parents who are helping their kids study. So Even there's an engagement of parents, siblings as they prepare. And when we surveyed kids after they participated last year, one of the top things they said is, this is fun because I get to choose what I'm learning and preparing for versus, hey, here's your homework assignment. And there's some ownership and agency, which to me is a first step in being civically engaged. Your agency as a young person to say, I want to learn, I want to know, and I want to be a part of something broader to make sure that I have a grasp of this basic knowledge around civics and civic engagement. So we really are excited because it's fun and exciting, but it's a learning journey. It's a real learning journey.
A learning journey for students, but also a learning journey for the civic organizations and how they make the most of it.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I have to tell you, Stephanie, one of the cool pieces of that, because, think about a B and you kind of advance, you go city, then regional, then state, which we're piloting this year. 10 states will have kind of advancement opportunity. And during that advancement opportunity, young middle school students write short essays on how they want to make a difference in their community on an issue they care about. So there's critical thinking and applied thinking. There's a section of this advancement process that's about, yes, memorizing some facts, because you got to know your facts to actually be able to, move the needle on something you care about. So the educational, if you will, journey of, yes, learn your knowledge, but then how do you use that knowledge in a meaningful way and on an issue that you care about? All of that is embedded in this educational journey and the civics fee for these middle schoolers. So it's really, I love it, because we often have this debate of like, should it be, know your facts and drill and learn, or should we have, the written essays and the critical? And the answer is we need it all. And this gives that journey for these young kids in middle school.
Well, I love these. I love the enthusiasm, and I love how sort of both they seem synergistic, but also varied, right? The approaches that you all are talking about. And sort of I promised you a quick lightning round. And so for the people who are watching, based on what you've learned from your work thus far, what is the one thing that you would advise? And I'll ask you each. So Katie, what's the one thing you would advise educators to do to really help young people sort of in this catalytic moment, to help young people become sort of capable citizens, as we say, well-informed, civically engaged, and committed to democracy? Do you have one bit of advice for educators?
So number one, Hannah, Indiana would like to sign up for the civics fee. And a bit of advice for educators. The old saying, children are great imitators. So we need to be conscious of what we're doing as educators. I also think we have to acknowledge our instructional practices. Kent and Hannah both talked about student agency. How do we leverage student interest, student agency in the classroom, and even build out a civics capstone? We're interested in building that out in Indiana as a potential future requirement. So a lot of opportunity for educators, but we need them to model good civics.
I really like that. The sort of imitating, that students are great imitators. Kent, what's the one thing you'd like to see practitioners like your grantees do differently in this space?
You're just not going to get me to say one thing. I mean, that
I didn't either, Kent. I broke the rules.
Right,
Go ahead.
right. Well, I mean, I mostly like what my grantees are up to, but let me try to do it as one thing. I think, while I appreciated very much the information that Matt and Debbie gave us, creative ways to think about measuring some of this stuff. The one thing that's missing is we haven't figured out how to assign value to these measures. The further away you get from a standardized test score or a GPA, or a transcript, the less value is assigned to some of these things that I think Hannah and Katie, matter a lot, right? I mean, I think if both kids and parents saw value in these new and more expanded ways of capturing experiences that carry a lot of civic capital, we'd get a lot more traction.
That was pretty good, Kent. There's like 2.5 things.
That's just 2.5 things.
So Hannah, so bring us home. If you have advice for philanthropists, what would you like to see them doing?
So I'm going to be a little facetious and dead serious at the same time. Sponsor a local civics bee in your community, because it is that opportunity for your business leaders, your community, your educators, your boys and girls clubs and groups to participate together and create a desire and champion, literally, this important journey for our young people. And I will say, Ken, I was thinking about what you were saying about value. Our goal is that 2030 marker, that the winner of our civics bee, maybe they get a full ride to college. Maybe, let's put our money where our mouth is and say, hey, this is important. We do value this. And we want to raise up this next generation to have, yes, the agency, yes, the knowledge, and the zest and zeal for our country, our communities, and what's possible when we really do know and own our own opportunity and our own responsibility.
So I want to thank you all so much. Thank you for your leadership, for your insights. I have a bunch of takeaways from this. Obviously, the primacy of agency and the importance of sort of work worth doing. I think sometimes the term civic and civics can sound kind of old-fashioned, and that makes it sound like you're just memorizing stuff, as opposed to what I just heard here. I mean, from all of you, is a huge amount of enthusiasm, the notion of agency, of this is what it is to be a passionate adult, and to be sort of honoring what what we heard from the young people in these videos a little earlier, which is like, they get that they are the future of this democracy, and how do we imbue this field and this collective effort with the kind of enthusiasm we heard from them and we heard here. And I think that my last word is that, Hannah, I am so psyched that you said that you want the civics bee, like the big civics bee, to be on ESPN and not C-SPAN. That, I think, is a revolution in this field. So thank you all so much. Raj, back to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I don't know the last time that I've been so excited about a panel. And, ESPN or bust, I guess, is going to be our calling card here. This was such an energizing and compelling panel. I know that part of any healthy civic infrastructure is making sure that we have role models for civic leadership. And I just want to thank all 4 of our panelists for being such role models. It was great to hear from them, great to get excited about this subject in this area. Before we head into open discussion and Q&A, let's hear from 2 more voices from the field on the possibility and promise for the field of civic learning.
At the Kettering Foundation, we understand that civic learning is critical to promote a sense of democratic responsibility, empowerment, and mutuality. All people should have meaningful opportunities to contribute to and participate in collective governance and to make demands on our political institutions, because the strength of a democracy is directly proportional to the degree of its inclusiveness. Members of a democracy have a collective obligation to protect the rights and equality of all. And that requires civic learning opportunities for people to practice these skills of democratic citizenship.
The civic dispositions of Americans are foundational to the continued operation and thriving of our constitutional republic. That's why I'm so excited. This outstanding report that lays out the categories of civic values and the operational measures that will allow scholars like me to continue to identify schools and educational approaches that help promote effective citizenship.
Civic education and engagement are the cornerstones of our democracy. Whether it's helping a student learn how to read, distributing meals to local families, or volunteering at a community job fair, I've seen people from all walks of life join together to solve their community's challenges. They show us time and time again that service and civic engagement bring us together, and they keep us strong against the forces that try to divide us. We are in a defining moment in our nation, and it's on us, it's on all of us to strengthen civic learning and build a culture of service in our country so that we can ensure young people have the knowledge and the skills they need to actively participate in our democracy. Let's continue working together to meet the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead.
Thank you to those videos. It's now time to hear from the audience, and we're pulling questions from folks. We'll start with the first question, which is there a measure that matters most? My research in 2019, a white paper that I wrote on the state of the civic learning ecosystem, actually talked about the need to develop young people who meet what we call the big three, that they were civically well-informed, productively engaged, and committed to democracy. And that all three were necessary, that even having just two of them wasn't enough, that you needed to be able to see progress against all three. And these maps show that as well. I would like to call upon one of our principal investigators, Matt Leininger. I'll call on you because you have a strong understanding of that second map, the map on civic opportunities, where people aren't as focused, or at least what we see is that there aren't as many measures. What's your perspective on this question of whether or not there's one set of measures that matter most when it comes to the civic opportunity side?
Well, I think some of the areas that are not being measured as much or at all are some of the newer sorts of things that have to do with how people interact with one another. So you'll notice, and if you look at page 35, I think it is in the report, maybe, no, sorry, 25, there, one version of the wheels has, written in red, these circles of where the deserts are. And so there are things like facilitation skills and convening skills that increasingly people we talk to, the interviewees mentioned as kind of increasingly important kind of aspects of public life, because they're about how people interact with one another. And those are among the things that people are measuring least. So in an era of polarization and conflict, these are some of the things we need to be recognizing. And as the other panelists have said, these are the things we need to be holding up and awarding and acknowledging people for if we really want them to be more important in our democracy.
Other members of the panel have any thoughts on the order here or importance? Debbie?
I want to echo a little bit about what Matt said and then add that one of the interesting findings in the report is that we don't really have a lot of data about how individuals are interacting with institutions. And we have a lot of concerns about that. People have very, very strong feelings sometimes. There are hypotheses that people have, and I think it would be urgent and helpful for us to better understand how that relationship occurs. So it's not a single measure, Raj, but it is, I think, a relationship that is urgent for us to understand better.
I'm reminded when Hannah brought up the civics bee, and I promise everyone, this is not just a sell for the civics bee over 1 hour, but she was talking about the fact that we were asking young people to think about knowledge and the application of it, and that it also connected to the agency, right? So that you can start to apply that across the measurement map for the individual too. So even when we're using different language, it seems to align with this thinking. Any other thoughts before I move to the next question? So this is a question that's more particular or specific to the maps themselves, which is what specifically are civic measurement deserts? Maybe Matt, if you want to take a shot at that, Debbie, and then you can add anything.
Sure, yeah. So those are the areas where we kind of felt that there wasn't, there weren't as many. We just couldn't find any, or at least not many, tools being people using to kind of measure them. And it is illustrated page 25 on the map with those things circled in red. Lindsay Alexander, the graphic designer who did all this, was driven crazy by our needs to have wheels that spin and dots and circles and things like that. She did a terrific job with all this. And I think that those, if you look more closely at those things, that you'll find some of those areas. We would love to have people suggesting tools that they may be using or know about, or that we don't know about, we didn't find so far. Maybe we can fill in some of those deserts at least a bit. But I think there's still going to be more of a need to kind of focus our efforts in those areas.
So next question, and Katie, just a heads up, I'm going to call on you first. Hannah, I know you have experience on this one as well. I'd love to hear what your thoughts. What plans are there to put measurement tools to work, either to measure secondary or higher education outcomes, or in a survey modality to understand what's working and what's not? Katie, I know you're a year and a half ahead, so maybe you've already thought about how to do this. And then Hannah, would love to hear from your experiences, how you think about that.
So Raj, this kind of connects back to the last question in terms of the deserts, because we're feeling that really in Indiana as we're trying to determine how we might measure going forward. So I shared with you, we have a new civics course kicking off in 6th grade in Indiana. We already have the civics standards spiraling. At senior year, we have a naturalization exam. Students take a portion and then are required to take it to send the results to us as a state. We have that report out. But that's the quantitative piece, and really the qualitative piece is what we're interested in building out. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned our graduation pathways. We have 3 key components. One of those components is service-based, project-based, work-based learning. In Indiana, we're really leaning into leadership from our Speaker of the House, Speaker Houston. We're really leaning in on reinventing high school, rethinking the 4 years. So in 11th and 12th grade, we want every child to have access to a credential of value, as well as a work-based learning experience. And what we're kind of contemplating is, should that also be, should we also think through a civics-based learning experience, hence that civic capstone? Mm-hmm. And if we do, that would lead almost to, we have the diploma, like a diploma plus model, if you can imagine, where we accelerate and scale, but we'll have to build out that measure because we just have not found a specific vendor. I'm sure there are some on here who are like, we're your person, and I'll get all these emails later. If you are, I'd like to talk to you. Otherwise, we're going to build it out, because we can't let perfect get in the way of good, and we have to move. Now's the time.
Thank you. Hannah, any thoughts?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. One, I'm just, I know it's an old axiom, but what gets measured gets done. And whether that's qualitative or quantitative, I think there's something we need to, kind of keep on the forefront as we think about what incentivizes people to really engage at the kind of what I'll call not from an educational standpoint, but at the elementary level that should inspire us, right? I also, Katie, you said something that I think is really important, and that is, we talk a lot about this at the high school level, and I think that's super important. Do not get me wrong. But I think one of the things we're seeing about this middle school, and you talked about the 6th grade, so important that foundational piece is there. So by the time you're in high school and feeling very action-oriented, that you already are equipped with what I'll call the foundation to have a meaningful impact. And I really do think that we've got to start thinking about that middle school age and what's possible. And finally, I will just say this: we run a scholarship program at the Daniels Fund. We have just under 5,000 scholars now in our 4 states, and we have Speaker Houston just gave away
exactly
a leader in championing civics, no doubt. And we have now incorporated into, we have something like a week-long prep for college. And we are now including a basic civics kind of 101. And our goal is to build on that each year for our scholars until they graduate college. So I do think there's this continuum, and there's this, way to think about building and scaffolding for our students, so that agency, it's not a one-hit wonder in a single grade. It is a lifelong commitment to be an awesome citizen in your community, your state, and your country. And how are we thinking about that?
Great.
Raj, this is a wonky comment, but everybody's provoked this. I feel like we lack an infrastructure for recording and reporting on these kinds of things, and that's part of the desert problem. And I mean, I think we have technologies for it, but no one's put their mind to, if we wanted to really represent, these skills and competencies, what would we want to know? How would we gather it up? So I could talk about that longer, but I won't. But that's another thing I think is, I'd be interested at some point to hear Matt and Debbie talk about that.
Sure. If I gave them the question right now, we'd all be here until 4:30. So I do think, Kent, you raise a really important point, which is part of our next phase, right? Trying to figure out how many of these tools have the validity that we would be comfortable saying that they actually work, so to speak, and what needs to be done, where are the gaps? And then what does this infrastructure look like? There's many of our friends, colleagues who are working on the Educating for American Democracy framework, and there's a number of researchers on that end, and that may be one of the ways in which you create an infrastructure. There's others that also exist and are being discussed. And I think it becomes critical to Hannah's earlier point, right? What gets measured gets done. We just have to be very thoughtful about this. There's not many times that you can kind of have this nascent point in time where you can actually do this in a thoughtful manner and balance the fact that Katie Jenner's saying, let's go, let's go, let's go, because I'm starting to actually do a comprehensive approach with young kids.
And Raj, did you see the Speaker of the House is also like, let's go, let's go, let's go. So that helps to have that support and pressure.
Exactly, Stephanie.
And I do want to just capture a couple of things. One, completely agree. But one, that what are the high leverage few? Because there are both so many in some places and then none in others. And what's the high leverage few and some that we can do now so we can get started? I think number one. And number two, to really put a finer point on Hannah's point, which is and this is part of, I guess, the notion that Katie said that students imitate, that it's not one and done. That, as we say, if we start in elementary school, and these citizen development activities are things that you do and grow and improve over a lifetime, and or through school, which may feel like a lifetime. But I do think that there's an imitation quality that having this exist over time, and not just in one thing, or not just in one course, or not just in one project.
That's right.
That I think is an important takeaway. That students should understand and then to imitate.
Absolutely right. So I have to say, personally speaking, it's not often that I have a Thursday afternoon Zoom call where I come out more energized than I went in. So I want to thank all the panelists, the speakers, the amazing work that was done, Matt, Debbie, the Citizens and Scholars team that has really kind of put this first phase of work together. There are still many phases of work ahead. Stay tuned in your inbox for ways to stay engaged in the future of this work and work with us to bring this framework to life. Thank you to all of you, and I look forward to working with all of you on this very important work.